Nadia Bloom had learned, early in life, that some people are born into rooms with windows, and some are born into hallways. She was a hallway person. She had always known this. She had never once resented it. Not until the winter she found herself standing at the back door of the Volkov estate, with snow falling into her hair, $67 in her coat pocket, and nowhere in this world to go. But that came later. The morning she arrived at the estate for the first time, she was 22 years old and carrying a canvas bag that held everything she owned. The bag was not heavy. She had taken the overnight bus from the small town of Greywater, where she had grown up in her aunt's two-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. Her aunt, Donna, had hugged her at the bus station with the kind of hug that said goodbye and good luck and I'm sorry I couldn't do more, all at once, without a single word. The Volkov estate sat on the northern edge of Harrow County, past the last petrol station, past the tree line, past the point where the road stopped being paved and became a wide gravel path that crunched under the bus driver's tires like something breaking. The estate itself appeared around a curve without warning, a gray stone manor house so large that Nadia's first thought was that it looked like a photograph of a building rather than a real one, like something cut from a magazine and placed in a field. She was not hired for the main house immediately. New staff always started in the laundry wing, and Nadia started there too, learning the weight of wet linen, learning which machines ran hot and which ran cold, learning to fold fitted sheets the way the head laundress, Kara, had been folding them for 20 years. Kara was a round-faced woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a practical kindness that she delivered without ceremony. She showed Nadia where to eat, where to sleep, and where not to go. Above the second floor you stay out, Kara said. Unless you are called up, you will not be called up for a while. Get through your first month before you start wondering about things you don't need to wonder about. Nadia was not the type to push. She got through the first month, then the second. By the third month, she had been moved to general housekeeping, dusting the long corridors, polishing the wood paneling in the east wing, keeping the guest rooms aired and turned. The estate employed 31 people on the grounds and inside the house, and Nadia found her place among them without difficulty. She was quiet. She did her work well. She did not gossip. She did not complain. These were qualities that the estate valued, and they were rewarded. A small pay increase at 6 months, a better room at the end of the east wing corridor, and occasional assignments in the main reception areas, where the floors were marble and the air smelled of wood polish, and fresh flowers changed twice a week. She saw Damon Volkov for the first time during her 4th month. She was cleaning the east staircase, wide stone steps that curved upward to the private second floor, when she heard footsteps above her and looked up without thinking. He was coming down. He was tall, broader than she had expected from the distant glimpses she'd caught through windows or across courtyards, with dark hair and the kind of face that was structured so precisely it seemed almost unfair. He was wearing a dark coat over work clothes, and he was reading something in his hand, papers, official-looking, folded once. He was not looking at the staircase. He was not looking at her. He walked past her on the stairs so close that she caught the cold outside air still on his coat, and he did not break his stride, did not look up from his papers, did not acknowledge in any way that another person existed on those stairs. She pressed herself to the side, her cleaning cloth still in her hand, and watched his back disappear around the corner of the ground floor corridor. She turned back to the stairs and kept cleaning. She told herself she had not noticed anything in particular. Over the following weeks, she developed a peripheral awareness of where he was in the estate at any given time, not from nosiness, but from necessity. Staff were expected to vacate corridors and rooms when the Alpha King was moving through them, not as a formal rule, but as an unspoken understanding. You learned to read the signs, the way the kitchen staff moved differently when he had been in that morning, the way doors that were usually open were quietly pulled closed, the particular silence that settled over a room 30 seconds before he entered it. She noticed him the way you noticed weather. You did not have to stare at a storm to know it was there. What surprised her, as the weeks became months, was how rarely he looked happy. She had imagined, from a distance, from what little she knew about people like him, that power felt like something, that it registered on a person's face as satisfaction, or ease, or at the very minimum, comfort. Damon Volkov looked none of those things. He looked contained. He looked like a man who had built very high walls around himself, and was now living inside them, and had somewhere along the way forgotten why he had built them in the first place. She told herself she was projecting. She had a habit of doing that, of reading things into people that she had no business reading. Her Aunt Donna used to say, "Nadia, not everyone is a story. Some people are just Tuesday." She tried to remember that. The estate had a rhythm, and she fell into it. Mornings began at 5:30. The kitchen staff had coffee ready at 6. The main house cleaning rotated. East wing Monday and Wednesday, West wing Tuesday and Thursday, common areas daily. There were estate meetings on the first Friday of every month where the head of staff, a lean, gray-suited man named Owen Marsh, reviewed schedules and addressed any matters of housekeeping. Owen was not unkind, but he was precise, and he valued precision above almost everything. He noticed when furniture was not replaced at exactly the correct angle. He noticed dust on top of door frames. Nadia noticed everything too, but she had learned to keep that quality hidden. In the world she came from, noticing too much could make people uncomfortable. She had grown up watching adults look sideways at children who asked too many questions, and she had trained herself to observe quietly, to file things away, to understand situations from the inside without announcing it. What she understood about the Volkov estate, by the end of her first year, was this. It was a house in a kind of suspended grief. Something had ended here, before she arrived, and the ending had not been fully acknowledged. The Alpha King moved through his own halls like a man navigating around a piece of furniture that had been removed years ago, stepping to one side without knowing why, the habit of avoiding a thing that was no longer there. The older staff knew about it. She caught it sometimes in the way Kara would go quiet when certain topics were raised, or in the careful distance Owen Marsh kept from any question about the family. She did not ask. She learned to read the edges. In the second year, her role expanded. She was assigned to the main reception rooms, the formal dining room, the two front sitting rooms, the library. The library was her favorite. It was a long room with tall shelves on 3 walls, and the fourth wall was all windows looking north toward the forest, and in the morning the light came through at an angle that turned the wooden floor gold. She cleaned it slowly on the days it was her assignment. She ran her cloth along the shelves with something close to reverence. The Alpha King used the library in the evenings sometimes. She was never assigned there during those hours. The evening cleaning rotated among the more senior staff, but she knew he was there because she occasionally passed the closed door at the end of her shift and saw the light beneath it. What he did in there was not her business. She made friends among the staff the way she made most things, slowly, carefully, without making a performance of it. Lucy Farrow, who worked the West Wing and had a loud laugh and a collection of terrible jokes that she deployed without warning. Pete Alderman, who drove the estate vehicles and had strong opinions about coffee and almost nothing else. And Kara, who had become something like a steady presence, the way certain pieces of furniture become steady. Not warm exactly, but solid, reliable, there. It was Lucy who first said, without looking up from the laundry she was folding, "You know everyone thinks you've got a thing for the king." Nadia stared at her. Lucy laughed. "I'm not judging. Half the staff has had a phase. It passes." "I don't have a thing," Nadia said. "Okay. I don't." "Okay, Nadia." She went back to her work, and she put the conversation out of her mind with the kind of deliberate efficiency she had developed over a lifetime of putting things in their proper place. She did not have a thing. She had a job. She had a room at the end of a corridor and a canvas bag that was only slightly heavier than the day she arrived, and she was building something small and careful and her own, and she did not have time or space for anything as inconvenient as what Lucy was suggesting. She believed that, mostly. There was one afternoon in October, during her second year, that she returned to much more often than she should have. She had been assigned to rearrange the books in the library after a deep clean. Someone had pulled things from the shelves for dusting and the organization had come slightly undone. She was working methodically, left to right, when she heard the door open. She turned. The Alpha King stopped in the doorway. "I didn't know anyone was in here," he said. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, reaching for her cart. "I'll come back later." "I didn't say leave." She stopped. He looked at the shelves, then at the books in her hands, a stack of 3 that she had been about to reshelf. He crossed the room and stopped on the other side of the shelves she was working on. He pulled one book out, looked at the spine, pushed it back. "The organization is by author last name," he said, "not by size." "I know," she said. "I'm putting them back the right way." He looked at her then, actually looked at her, for the first time she could remember, with attention. Not the unfocused gaze of a man walking past the furniture, but genuine attention, arriving and landing. "You've been here a while," he said. 2 years, she said, almost. He nodded. He took the 3 books from her hands. She was so surprised that she simply let him, and slotted them into their correct positions without looking away from the shelf. He had done this before, clearly. He knew this library. "Most people don't touch the library shelves," he said. "The last person who organized them was my mother." He said it the way people say things they have said so many times in their own heads that the words have worn smooth. No roughness left, no evidence that it had ever been hard. He walked out. She stood for a moment in the quiet, the October light long and slanted on the floor, and then she went back to work. She filed that afternoon in the same careful place she filed everything she couldn't afford to think about too carefully. The library. The way he had taken the books from her hands without asking. His mother. The worn, smooth way he said it. She did not take it out and look at it. She left it there and kept working. The estate in winter was different from the estate in any other season. The heating in the older parts of the building was unpredictable. It worked beautifully in the formal rooms, where it mattered for appearances, and worked only adequately in the staff corridors, where it did not need to impress anyone. Nadia had grown up in cold buildings. She knew how to layer. She knew how to carry warmth with her by moving efficiently, by not standing still too long, by treating cold not as a thing to endure but as a thing to work around. The northern forest beyond the estate grounds was visible from her window. In December, the trees turned into black lines against white sky, and in the early mornings, when she woke before her alarm and lay listening to the quiet, she could watch the dark shapes of birds crossing between the branches. She liked that window. It was one of the things she had not expected to find here, something worth looking at. She was 3 years in when she began, slowly and without intending to understand the weight of what she had been building, the small pay increases, the expanding duties, the way Owen Marsh sometimes sent her to situations where a steady hand was needed rather than just a clean one, calming a nervous event temp, redirecting a vendor who had come to the wrong entrance, managing a catering delivery when the kitchen was short-staffed. He did not call it anything. He simply sent her. She simply went. She had come here with nothing. She had built something. It was small, but it was hers, and it was solid, and she held it carefully the way you hold something you know you cannot afford to drop. And then December arrived. A particular December. A solstice storm rolled in from the north on a Friday afternoon, the kind of storm that turned the estate road to ice within an hour, and made the nearest town a thing that might as well not exist. By evening, the estate was a closed world. The outer gates locked automatically. The generators hummed as backup. The skeleton evening staff moved quietly through the corridors. And somewhere between the end of her shift and the moment the lights in the east wing flickered twice, everything she had been so carefully building began to move. She did not know that yet. She was simply carrying a tray of tea to the library, covering for one of the senior staff who had gone home sick before the storm hit, and the light was warm and the house was quiet, and the snow outside the window was coming down so thick that the forest had disappeared entirely. She knocked twice. She heard his voice say, "Come in." She pushed the door open with her shoulder, the tray balanced, the tea still hot. He was sitting by the window, not reading, just looking at the place where the forest used to be. She set the tray down on the table beside him without speaking. She was about to leave when he said, "It's going to be bad by morning." "It already is," she said. He looked at her. She was almost at the door. "Sit down," he said. "I'm not going to say it twice." She sat down. She did not know why. She had worked in this estate for 3 years, and she had learned every unspoken rule of it, and this was not part of any rule she knew, and her heart was doing something loud and inconvenient inside her chest. And she sat down anyway. They talked, or he talked, at first, about the storm, about the estate road, about something structural in the north wing that needed attention before the ground froze. She answered in short, careful sentences, practical ones. She was very good at practical sentences. Somewhere in the next hour, something shifted. She was not able to say later exactly when it happened, at what moment the conversation moved from practical to something else. He asked her where she was from. She told him about Greywater, about the hardware store, about her Aunt Donna, with the kind of careful brevity she applied to everything personal. He listened the way he had looked at her that afternoon in the library, with actual attention, the kind that does not look away or fill silences with its own voice. He poured 2 cups of tea. He gave her one. She took it. Her hands were cold and the cup was warm, and she wrapped both hands around it and thought, very clearly, do not let this become a thing. She let it become a thing. Not that night. That night she finished her tea and stood up and said good night in a voice that was very steady, and she walked back to her room and lay in her bed listening to the storm, and she told herself that a conversation was a conversation, that people who worked in the same building sometimes talked to each other, that nothing had happened. But something had begun, and beginnings, once started, do not wait for permission. Over the following weeks, the estate returned to its normal rhythm, and Nadia returned to hers. She did not seek out the library. She did not linger in corridors she did not need to be in. She was careful and deliberate, and she told herself, more than once, that she was too sensible for this, too practical, too firmly built to be knocked sideways by a conversation over tea during a snowstorm. She cleaned the east staircase. She managed the guest room rotation. She covered for Lucy one Thursday when Lucy's back went out. She was steady and useful and present, and inside all of that steadiness, she was carrying something new that she did not know what to do with, something warm and inconvenient that pressed at the edges of her practical daily life, like light under a door. She told herself it would pass. She believed that, almost entirely. It did not pass. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over large houses in January, not the comfortable quiet of rest, but the quiet of waiting, as though the house itself is holding its breath for something it cannot name. Nadia had felt it in the estate before, in the long gray afternoons between the Christmas preparations and the slow return of the world to its working shape. But this January it was different, or she was different. She could not always tell which. She went about her work as she always did. She was good at going about her work. She had built this skill over a lifetime, the ability to move through her own interior weather without letting it touch what was visible on the outside. Her face in the corridors of the Volkov estate was a professional face, pleasant and efficient and present, and she wore it the way you wear a coat in cold air, not as a disguise, just as a sensible response to conditions. What was inside it, she kept to herself. The library had been reassigned. She was no longer the one to clean it. This was not unusual. The rotation shifted regularly according to scheduling needs, and there was nothing pointed about it, nothing that suggested anything had changed. She was assigned the West Wing corridors and the formal dining room, and she did those well, and she did not think about the library. She thought about the library. She thought about the 15 minutes she had spent there during the storm in December, sitting across from Damon Volkov with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, talking about gray water and hardware stores and her Aunt Donna. She thought about the way he had listened, the particular quality of it, the absence of performance. Most people who occupied positions of power listened with one ear. He had listened with all of himself, in a way that made the air in the room feel strangely clear, like windows opened on a morning after rain. She was aware that she was constructing something from very little material. A conversation, one conversation. People had conversations every day and they did not build entire interior architectures out of them. She was being foolish in a way that she, of all people, could not afford. She was being foolish anyway. February arrived. The estate hosted a small gathering of county officials, a formal thing, 2 evenings over the second week of the month, requiring full staff on deck. Nadia had worked estate events before and she was good at them. Fast, unobtrusive, attuned to the room's needs before the room itself knew what they were. Owen Marsh put her on the second evening, the larger of the two, where she was assigned to the reception corridor and the entrance hall, greeting arriving guests when the regular door staff were occupied, directing people to the right rooms, managing the coats and outer garments with the smooth efficiency of someone who has figured out how to be useful without taking up space. The second evening of the gathering was when she first saw them together. She was at the far end of the entrance hall when she heard the group coming down the main staircase. Damon, 2 men she recognized as estate officials, and a woman. The woman was someone Nadia had not seen at the estate before, and she stopped what she was doing for a half-second, which was a half-second longer than she should have, because the woman was the kind of person who made rooms rearrange themselves. Tall, dark-haired, in a red dress that had been cut to suggest that clothes were optional information. She was speaking into Damon's ear with the casual familiarity of someone who had earned it. Nadia turned back to her work. She heard Lucy later that night, in the staff kitchen over instant coffee that tasted mostly of tiredness, explaining in low detail that the woman in the red dress was called Helena Sloan, that she came from a major Southern Territory family, that she had been attached to the estate in various capacities for the past couple of years, that everyone had always assumed, in the vague way people assumed these things about powerful men, that it was probably heading somewhere. Heading where? Nadia asked. Lucy gave her a look. Where does it usually head? Nadia drank her coffee. Good, she said. Lucy looked at her for a moment. Yeah, she said. Good. Nadia went to bed that night and lay in the dark listening to the February wind move against the window pane, and she told herself, with the full weight of her considerable practicality bearing down on the thought, that this was exactly right. This was the correct shape of things. She cleaned floors. He ran a territory. These were not the same category of person, and whatever she had imagined growing in the quiet of December, she would now quietly remove, like a weed, efficiently, before it caused any damage. She did this, or she did it almost, and for a few weeks in February and into early March, the estate had its usual rhythm and she had her usual face, and everything proceeded in the way that things proceed when you are determined to make them normal. And then she ran into him. Not a graceful near miss, an actual collision. She was carrying a stack of folded linens down the west corridor on a Saturday afternoon, a tall stack, the kind you balance against your chin and navigate by muscle memory, and she took the corner near the library door without looking because she never needed to look. She had taken that corner 400 times, and he was on the other side of it, coming from the library, and the linens went everywhere. She said a word she was not proud of. She crouched immediately, reaching for the scattered sheets, and he crouched at the same moment, also reaching, and their heads nearly collided, and she rocked back and looked up and found him approximately 30 centimeters from her face. He picked up a folded pillowcase. He handed it to her. She took it. "Where are you going with these?" he said. "Guest rooms," she said. "West Wing." "I'm sorry." "For what?" I wasn't looking." "Neither was I." He picked up another folded item, this one a sheet that had come completely undone, and he made an attempt to refold it that went significantly wrong. She watched this happen. "I can do that," she said. "I've got it." He did not have it. She watched him fight the sheet for a moment, and then she reached over and took it from him, and refolded it in 4 moves. She was aware that she had just taken something from the hands of the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and that she had done it with the brisk impatience of someone taking a task from a person doing it wrong, and she felt a complicated flash of something that was approximately half horror and half something she was not naming. He looked at her. His expression was not offended. If anything, he looked like he was deciding whether to smile. "You've been here a while," he said. She realized this was the second time he had said this to her. She wondered if he knew. 3 years, she said. "In March." "Nadia," he said. She looked at him. He had said it the way you say a word you have been carrying in your mouth for a while. Not testing it, exactly, but owning it, like he already knew it fit. "Yes," she said. "I remembered," he said simply. And then he stood, and the corridor returned to its normal dimensions, and he walked toward the stairs, and she stood there with her armful of linens and her heart doing the loud, inconvenient thing again. And the light in the west corridor was thin and gray-white from the overcast windows, and the whole moment felt very thin and gray-white too, like something held up against light to be examined. She went and made up the guest rooms. She was very efficient about it. March moved into April, and April had a way of brightening the estate that winter could not touch. The grounds came back. The flower borders along the south wall began to show color. The kitchen staff started leaving doors open. Nadia had always found this shift in seasons useful. It made things feel more straightforward somehow, more like what they were. She was carrying more responsibility in the estate now than she had at any previous point. Owen Marsh had given her the coordination of the East Wing staff schedule, which was a real duty, the kind you could be held accountable for, and therefore the kind that mattered. She was good at it. She was good at seeing what needed doing before it fell to someone else to say so, and she liked the feeling of a thing running cleanly under her management. She was professional and capable and steady, and she kept running into him. Not always accidentally. That was the honest thing she kept having to acknowledge in the privacy of her own thoughts. Some of them were accidental. The estate was large, but not that large, and their paths crossed with the simple logic of shared space. But some of them were not exactly accidental either, in the way that you might walk an extra corridor to reach your destination, not because it is faster, but because it passes a window you like. She did not fully admit this to herself, but she did not fully not admit it either. In April, she noticed that he sometimes worked late in the estate office, not the formal one on the ground floor, but a smaller room on the second floor, tucked in the corner of the north wing, that looked like it had been used as a private study for generations, and was still being used that way. She knew this because the light was sometimes on at 10 at night when she did a final security walk on the second floor. Not her official duty, but something she had begun doing because someone should and no one else seemed to be. She walked past. She did not stop. She stopped once. She was not sure why. The light was on and she had been about to pass as she always did, and she stopped. And she stood in the corridor for 3 seconds that felt like much longer. And then the door opened and he was there, holding a cup of cold coffee with the look of a man who had been working for too many consecutive hours. "You do the security walk," he said. "Nobody else does," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Come in," he said. She should not have gone in. She went in. The room was warm, a real fire in the small grate, the only room in the north wing where the fireplace actually worked, and papers covered the desk in the organized disorder of someone who knew exactly which pile contained what. She stood near the door. He sat on the edge of the desk and drank his cold coffee and looked at her. "Do you like it here?" he said. The question surprised her, not what she had expected him to ask. "Yes," she said. Then, because honesty was the reflex she had never fully trained out of herself. Mostly. Mostly, he repeated. The heating in the east corridor, she said. It's been wrong since November. He looked at her. Then he laughed. She had not heard him laugh before. It was a brief thing, not performed, the genuine article. A sound that happened to him, rather than one he produced. It changed his face completely for the 3 seconds it lasted. I'll tell Owen, he said. I already told Owen, she said, 3 times. He looked at her steadily. I'll tell Owen, he said again, with a different weight. The heating in the east corridor was fixed within a week. She found out from Pete, who found out from the maintenance crew, who had received an instruction directly from the Alpha King's office. Lucy looked at Nadia very meaningfully across the staff kitchen when this information circulated. I told Owen, Nadia said. Sure, said Lucy. She went back to her work. The east corridor was warm for the first time since October, and she walked through it every morning and felt the difference, and told herself it was just a building maintenance issue that had finally been resolved, and she believed that, almost. May came with long evenings and late light. She began to learn, in the way you learn things about people without being told, a rougher shape of his days, the morning estate briefings that ran long, the afternoon rides through the grounds that he took alone, that the stable hands prepared for without being asked because the pattern had held for years, the evenings that varied, guests sometimes, work always. She learned that he had been Alpha King for 7 years, since he was 26, when his father had suffered a medical crisis that left the territory without its leader, and the succession had been handed early. She learned this not from him but from Kara, who said it in the matter-of-fact way of someone reporting weather conditions. She learned that the years since had been defined by consolidation and work, and the steady pressure of responsibility without relief. She heard, from various corners of the staff, the name Helena Sloan again, and then again. She filed it. She kept it in its proper place. June was when things changed, quietly, the way tides change. Not at any single identifiable moment but through the steady accumulation of small movements in one direction. He began to speak to her when they passed in corridors. Not significant conversations, a word about the weather, a question about whether a particular guest room was ready, a comment once about the book she had carried under her arm during her lunch break. Brief things, but they were not nothing. She managed them. She was crisp and useful and professional, and she walked back to whatever she had been doing and felt the small burn of those conversations inside her chest for the rest of the afternoon. July. August. She had been at the estate for 3 years, and she was not the same person who had arrived with a canvas bag and $67, and she knew that. She had learned things here, about large houses, about the way power moved through spaces, about herself. She had learned that she was good at more than she had been given credit for in Greywater. She had learned that she had a quality that Owen Marsh, who did not praise easily, had described once in her quarterly review as uncommon reliability. She had kept that phrase. It lived in the same careful interior place where she kept the library in October, and the January she had decided to be sensible, and the day in March when he had said her name like it already fit. She was building something. She kept building. She did not think about where it was heading. She was a practical person. She thought about what was in front of her, and what was in front of her was work, and the estate, and the east corridor with its fixed heating, and the north forest outside her window turning green, and then darker green, and then, by September, beginning at the edges to show the first suggestion of gold. She was not naive. She had never been naive. She knew what she was, and what he was, and she knew the simple mathematics of their positions, the way lines at different angles do not eventually meet, but instead travel further and further apart if you let them run. She was letting them run. She was sensible. She was fine. And then September became October, and October sharpened, and the forest turned the deep amber and red of real autumn, and she came to understand, very slowly and then all at once, that she was not fine at all, that she had been not fine for months, that somewhere between the linens on the west corridor floor and the warm firelit north wing study and the east corridor finally running warm, she had made a mistake she had no name for yet, and no plan to correct. She held this knowledge carefully. She did not let it change her face in the corridors. She was very good at that. She cleaned the east staircase. She managed the schedule. She walked the north wing security round at 10 at night, and sometimes the light was on in the small study and sometimes it was not. And on the nights it was on she walked past with exactly the same stride she had used when it was off. She was building something small and careful and hers. She did not know, in those October evenings, watching the amber forest from her window with her cold cup of tea, that the next December would take everything she had built and scatter it like the linens on the corridor floor. She did not know about the storm coming, and the library, and what would begin that night. She did not know what she was walking toward. She woke up every morning and went to work and was excellent at her job, and the estate held its breath for winter, and the trees outside her window went slowly bare. The solstice storm arrived on a Thursday. Nadia had been awake since 4:30 that morning, not from anxiety, just from the body's stubborn insistence on alerting her to things before she was ready for them. She had lain in the dark listening to the wind pick up speed against the north wing, and known, in the way you know about weather when you have lived close to it, that this one was not going to be brief. By the time she was up and dressed and in the kitchen for 6 o'clock coffee, the estate road was already showing ice under the security lights, and the sky had the flat white pressure of a sky with a great deal more to say. Owen Marsh had sent a general notice to all staff by 6:15. Anyone who had intended to leave the grounds that evening should go before noon. Anyone who could stay should stay. Skeleton crew protocol would begin at 7. Most of the event and casual staff left by 11. By noon, the gate had been ice-locked and the estate had contracted to its essential self. 18 people, the permanent staff who lived on site, and the house. Nadia stayed, naturally. She always stayed. The estate in reduced circumstances was, in some ways, the estate she liked best. Stripped of its formal performance, running on the quiet competence of the people who actually knew how things worked. She and Lucy covered the West Wing together that afternoon, and Pete drove the supply vehicle one last time to the storage barn, and Kara organized the kitchen with the satisfied energy of someone whose environment had been simplified to something she understood completely. By 4 in the afternoon, the snow was falling thick and sideways, and the forest beyond the north garden had entirely disappeared. The estate was an island. At 5, one of the second-floor serving staff, Daniel, who had been assigned the evening library service, came to find Nadia in the corridor. He looked pale in the specific way that people look when something is wrong with their bodies rather than their minds. "My back," he said, with the brief dignity of someone who has been embarrassed by their own body before. "Go lie down," she said. "I'll cover." "You don't have to." "Daniel." She looked at him. "Go." He went. She went to the kitchen, made up the tea service, the specific way the library evening service was always made up, which she knew, because she had paid attention to the details of every task in the estate, whether or not it was currently hers, and carried the tray down the long corridor to the library. She knocked twice. She heard come in. She pushed the door with her shoulder. He was sitting by the window, not reading, not working, just sitting, looking at the white nothing where the forest used to be. He was still in his work clothes from the day, dark shirt, jacket laid over the arm of the chair, and he had the look of a man who had been in his own thoughts for long enough that coming back to the room was a small adjustment. She set the tray on the side table. She poured 1 cup, because that was her job, and she set the cup and saucer where he could reach them. She turned to go. "It's going to be bad by morning," he said. She stopped. She had been about to leave. She had intended to leave. Leaving was the sensible, professional, correct action. "It already is," she said. "Sit down," he said. "I'm not going to say it twice." She had already learned, or she was in the process of learning, that this was a particular quality of his. He said things once. He did not perform requests. He also did not demand. It was something in the middle, the kind of statement that knew it would be answered without needing to enforce it. She had found this, in the abstract, maddening. She found it, in this moment, sitting down. The library was warm. The fireplace in the library was one of the 3 in the main house that worked without issue, and it had been burning since the afternoon, and the room held the heat well. Outside the window, the snow was a white wall. Inside, the light was the particular amber of fireplaces in old rooms, and the shelves rose around them in their ordered rows, and it was the kind of room that made the world outside feel like a different category of existence. He poured a second cup of tea. He set it near her. She looked at it, then at him. "You don't have to be somewhere," he said. It was not a question. "No," she said. "Then stay." She did not say yes. She picked up the cup, which was the same as saying yes, and she wrapped her hands around it because her hands were cold from the corridor, and she looked at the fire. They talked about the storm first, the way you do, the practical shape of it, how long it would last, whether the generator had enough fuel. These were easy things to say, and she said them easily, and he answered, and the conversation established its footing. She was good at practical conversations. She could do this. And then, somewhere in the warmth of the room and the white silence of the storm outside, The conversation became something else, without either of them deciding it. He asked where she was from. She told him. He listened with the focused quality she had noticed before. No part of him somewhere else, the whole thing directed at what she was saying. She had been asked this question 100 times in social situations and had given the smooth, abbreviated answer. Small town, up north, nothing dramatic. With him she said more. She was not sure why. She found herself describing Greywater properly, the hardware store, the smell of it, the particular light in late afternoon when the western windows caught the sun. Her Aunt Donna, who had taken her in at 9 after her parents could not keep things together, who had given her a bed and steadiness, and had never once made her feel like a burden, even on the days it must have been hard. She stopped herself. Sorry, she said. You didn't ask for the full version. I asked where you were from, he said. That is where you're from. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire. His profile in that light was severe in the way of old coins, all clean lines and no excess, and she looked away from it. Where did you grow up, she said, which was a question she had no business asking, and which came out anyway. He did not seem bothered by it. Here, he said, this house, these grounds. A pause. A very specific kind of nowhere. She thought about that. About being a child in these corridors, in this library. About what it would mean to grow up inside a building that felt, even to her, like an institution you happened to live in. That sounds lonely, she said. She said it before she could stop herself. It was a direct thing to say. It assumed too much. She felt the edge of it the moment it left her mouth, and she waited for the change in the room, the slight retraction, the polite redirect that powerful people used when someone crossed an invisible line. He looked at her. Yes, he said simply. It was. Something moved in the room then, not changed exactly, but settled, as though an admission had been made on both sides simultaneously. She looked at the fire again. She heard the wind hit the north window hard. She was aware of being exactly here, in this room, on this night, with a precision she usually only felt when something was ending. Strange, she thought, to feel it when something might be beginning. He talked then, gradually, in the unforced way of someone who does not often get the chance, about the estate, about the responsibility of it, about the years since he had taken on the territory at 26, not in complaint, more in the way of simply articulating a thing that had not been articulated in a while. He had the detachment of someone who had learned early to separate themselves from their own circumstances and examine them like objects on a table. She listened the way he listened, with all of herself, the way she rarely bothered to with most people. She asked questions sometimes, small ones, placed carefully. He answered them with an honesty that she had not expected, the blunt simplicity of someone for whom performance had become too exhausting to maintain when the audience was small enough. She did not know how much time passed. The fire needed tending once, and she did it without asking, because that was her reflex, and she was halfway back to her chair before she thought to be self-conscious about it. He watched her do it with something in his expression she chose not to examine too closely. At some point the conversation became quiet. Not awkward, the other kind. The kind that happens between people who have found, unexpectedly, that the silence between them is not difficult. The east corridor heating, he said at one point, out of nowhere. She looked at him. I know it took too long, he said. It did, she said. I should have looked into it sooner. Owen should have, she said, because it was accurate. But yes, sooner would have been better. He smiled at that, the slight version, the one that was probably not for general distribution. She had learned there were two versions, the one he produced in public, which was smooth and correct and could have been painted on, and the slight one that happened when he was not managing his face. This was the slight one. She should go. She knew she should go. The evening was later than she had realized, and the storm outside had settled into the steady, committed snowfall that meant it intended to stay. And she had an early morning. And she was a staff member of this estate, and he was the Alpha King. And she should put down her cup and stand up and say goodnight, and walk back down the corridor to the east wing with her professional face on, and lock the memory of this evening in the same interior cabinet where she kept everything else she could not afford. Stay for dinner, he said. She looked at him. The kitchen has something, I'll call down. She was already calculating the angles, the risk, the absolute certainty that this was a line past which things would not be exactly what they had been before. She stayed. Dinner was not elaborate. Kara had prepared a simple meal for the skeleton crew, and there was enough, and it was brought up on a tray by Pete, who did not react to the situation in any visible way, because Pete was fundamentally unflappable, and also probably had been told something by someone. Or not. She did not know. She stopped thinking about it. They ate by the fire in the library. They talked more. The conversation moved into different rooms, books, which she was tentative about and he was direct, and she found that her own opinions, produced carefully, were met with actual engagement, rather than the polite nodding she had learned to expect. Music, which she knew almost nothing about in the classical sense that he did, but which led to a 20-minute conversation about sound and what it does to a room that she found she was entirely absorbed in. She learned that he had a younger sister who lived in the South and called irregularly and sent expensive gifts at Christmas in the way of someone who did not know what else to offer. She learned that he had trained for law before the succession happened and had found it, in the early years of running the territory, both useful and deeply inadequate for what the role actually required. She learned that he found most formal social gatherings exhausting in a way he managed well enough that it apparently did not show. She told him about the book she had been reading. She told him about the way the light hit the library floor in October. She told him, carefully and only a little, about what it had meant to build something here after years of Greywater, where she had loved her aunt, but always felt the shape of what she did not have, like a space she was being asked to move around. "You built it," he said. "That's yours." She looked at the fire. "Yes," she said. The logs had burned down to deep red coals. The storm outside had gone from violent to steady, the kind that settles into work. The house around them was silent, not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of people at rest. She had lost track of time in a way she never lost track of time. She stood up. He stood with her. "Good night," she said. She made her voice the right thing. Warm, but firm. The thing that meant this was a complete thing with an ending, not a beginning. He looked at her for a moment. He said good night. He did not touch her. He did not lean forward. He was absolutely still, and she walked to the door and put her hand on the frame. "Nadia," he said. She stopped, her back to him. "Thank you," he said, "for staying." She did not say you're welcome. She did not say anything. She walked out, and the corridor was cold after the fire warmth of the library, and she went back to her room, and she lay in the dark listening to the storm, and she held the evening in her hands and looked at it, and tried to understand what she had in her possession. She did not sleep for a long time. Over the following days, the storm cleared, the road reopened, the estate returned to its December preparations. She watched to see if anything had changed, whether he would look at her differently in the corridors, whether the evening in the library would register in any visible way, whether she herself would be different in a way that was readable on the outside. He was the same. Correct, contained, professional. He passed her once in the entrance hall and nodded, and she nodded, and that was the extent of it. She was almost relieved. The evening had been a closed thing, a specific night shaped by a storm and a warm room, and an absence of most of the people who usually occupied the space between them. It was complete. It had an ending. She had said good night and walked out, and that was the right shape of it. She believed that firmly, and she went back to work, and she managed the December preparations with her usual competence, and she looked at Christmas as a line in the distance past which things would simply be normal. She was wrong about it being closed. She knew this before she admitted it. She had felt something change in the room that night, in the library, around the hour when they had gone quiet together in the non-difficult way. Something that had no practical application and no sensible place in her daily structure. She could file a lot of things. She had filed everything up to this point very successfully, but the December evening in the library was doing something she had not accounted for. It was reorganizing things she had already put away. She started sleeping less. She was efficient enough that this did not affect her work, but she was aware of it in the quiet hours, lying awake in the early morning. The east corridor warm now thanks to the repaired heating, the dark forest outside her window slowly accumulating its December silence. She was not naive. She had never been naive. She knew the risk in every dimension she could name. She knew that she was a staff member and he was the Alpha King, and that the distance between those positions was not merely a matter of salary but of category. She knew about Helena Sloane, who had come to the estate in her red dress and spoken into his ear with the ease of earned access. She knew about the council, and the pressures it exerted, and the kind of woman a man in his position was expected to produce for public occasions. She knew all of this. She pressed her face into the pillow at 4 a.m, and knew all of it. And she also knew the way he had sat in the firelight with all of himself present, the way he had said yes, it was lonely, without looking away, the way he had listened to her talk about Greywater with his whole attention, as though what she said mattered not because she was useful, but because she was the one saying it. She knew both things. She could not make them resolve. January came, cold and white and certain, and she went back to work. She found out on a Tuesday, not because she was looking. She had not been looking. She had been the most aggressively not looking person in the Northern Territories for 3 weeks, since Christmas, since the staff rotation had shifted and she was back on the East Wing, and the library felt like something that had happened to a different version of her in a different year. She had been excellent at not looking. She found out in the staff bathroom at 6:40 in the morning on a Tuesday in late January, with the heating pipes making their early sounds and the small frosted window above the sink letting in a band of gray winter light. She sat on the cold tile floor for a long time. There was a kind of stillness that happened in her when things were very serious, not calm exactly, because calm was a feeling, and this was not a feeling, it was a suspension. The gears of her practical mind going absolutely still while the rest of her caught up with what she was looking at. 2 lines. She had bought the test in town on her Saturday off, not because she had specific cause to, but because there had been a low-grade signal she had been trying not to follow, and she had finally followed it. She had put it in the back of her desk drawer and not thought about it for 3 days. Then she had taken it out this morning and done it, and set it on the edge of the sink and walked to the other end of the bathroom to give it its time. 2 lines. She was very still on the tile floor. She thought, this is fine. She thought, this is not fine. She thought, you are a practical person, and practical people deal with actual circumstances, and the actual circumstance right now is this, and you are going to stand up and go to work and think about this later, when you have thought about it properly. She stood up. She went to work. She was remarkable that day, by her own later assessment. She managed the East Wing schedule with complete competence. She covered for a sick kitchen staff member at lunch service. She had a calm and useful 15-minute conversation with Owen Marsh about the spring estate calendar, in which she contributed several sensible suggestions and took notes in her small notebook and expressed no indication whatsoever that she was currently in the process of having her interior world rearranged without her permission. She went back to her room at the end of her shift and sat on her bed and thought. She was 24 years old. She had $68 of personal savings over and above her emergency fund. She had no family within 600 miles except her Aunt Donna in Greywater. She had a room at the end of the East Wing corridor of the Volkov estate, and she had a job she was good at, and she had 3 years of careful building behind her, and a future she had been shaping one good shift at a time. She thought about him. She thought about the library in December. The fire, the storm, the hour when everything had settled into a different shape. She thought about all the things she had known before that night, and kept knowing even during it, all the sensible mathematics of their positions. She thought about Helena Sloane in the red dress. She thought about her Aunt Donna, who had taken her in at 9 years old without being asked, and had never once said, you owe me anything. She was going to figure this out. She had figured out harder things with fewer resources. She was a practical person. She did not tell anyone for 2 weeks. She ran the calculations quietly in the back of her mind while she went about her work, which was what her mind had always done. Solved problems below the surface, so the surface could keep moving. She looked at her savings. She looked at what her options were, which was a short and not encouraging list. She looked at the geography of her situation, which was that she had built her life inside the walls of this estate and almost nothing of it existed outside. She could leave. That was the first option. The one she kept returning to and examining from all sides. She could give notice, collect her references, which would be excellent, she knew that, and leave before anyone knew anything. She could go to another estate, another position, somewhere where she had at least a small established name. She could manage this situation somewhere else. She kept coming back to the question of what she was managing it into. A room somewhere, another position. Starting again, this time with something more at stake. She could stay and say nothing. Watch and wait and see how long she could maintain the shape of normal. This was not a long-term plan, she knew that, but it had the appeal of postponement, of keeping the decision theoretical for a little longer. She could tell him. She examined this option with more complexity than either of the others. She ran every possible version of the conversation, every response he might give, every consequence that response might produce. She was fair about this. She tried to be fair, to give herself a version in which the conversation went well, in which he was the same person he had been in the library, in which everything could be figured out together. The version where it went well was hard to build without adding things she did not have evidence for. What she had evidence for was a man who contained himself rigorously, who had spent 7 years managing his own position with precision, who had a political landscape to navigate, and a council that had expectations, and a certain woman named Helena Sloane, who came and went from this estate with the ease of someone at home in it. She built the good version anyway. She looked at it, she looked at the other versions, she put them all away. In the 3rd week, Lucy noticed. Not what was happening, not specifically. But Lucy had a quality that could be annoying and was currently very annoying, which was that she had known Nadia long enough to read the weather of her. She found Nadia in the West Wing one afternoon, and fell into step beside her, with the casual air of someone who was not about to say a significant thing. "You look like you're solving a math problem that doesn't have an answer," Lucy said. "I'm working," Nadia said. "You're always working, this is different." "I'm fine, Lucy." Lucy was quiet for a corridor length, then, "You know you can tell me things. I don't have to be useful about it. I can just listen." Nadia stopped walking. She stood in the west corridor with her clipboard and her schedule and her 3 weeks of interior calculation, and she looked at her friend, and she thought, "This is the part where it stops being only inside me." "Not today," she said. "Okay," said Lucy. "Soon," said Nadia. She told Lucy on a Friday evening, in Lucy's room, with the door closed. Lucy sat on her bed and listened without interrupting, which was not in Lucy's natural register, and the effort of it showed on her face in the way a person's face shows effort when they are overriding their instincts. When Nadia finished, Lucy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need?" Not, "What are you going to do?" Not, "What does he know?" Not, "What were you thinking?" Just, "What do you need?" Nadia had spent 3 weeks calculating and preparing and examining scenarios, and this simple question made something in her chest do something she did not have a name for yet. "I don't know," she said, which was the most honest thing she had said in weeks. "Okay," Lucy said, "then we figure it out." They talked for 2 hours, not solving anything. There was nothing to solve yet. Nothing concrete had been decided, but thinking out loud, which was different from thinking alone and useful in different ways. Lucy asked practical questions. She also asked the questions Nadia had been avoiding, the ones about what she wanted, which was almost harder to answer than the practical ones. "Do you want to tell him?" Lucy asked. Nadia looked at her hands. "I don't know what good it does," she said. "That's not what I asked." A long pause. "I don't know," Nadia said. She left Lucy's room at 10 with slightly more clarity and slightly more confusion, which was, Lucy had pointed out cheerfully, what clarity usually looked like at first. She did not have to make a decision about telling him. The decision was made for her. It was the head laundress, not Kara. Kara had moved to kitchen management, but her replacement, a woman named Gloria, who was professional and thorough, and unfortunately placed Nadia in proximity to a guest room cleaning assignment on a Thursday morning that she happened to be 8 minutes late to, which meant that Nadia and her canvas bag were in the corridor for those 8 minutes at a time when they should not have been, and Gloria had extremely good observational skills. Nadia did not know any of this had happened until the following week. She was in the East Wing on a Monday afternoon when Owen Marsh appeared in the corridor with the expression he wore when something was unpleasant, and he had decided not to delay it. "My office," he said, not unkindly, just with the weight of something decided. She followed him. Owen Marsh's office was a small, tidy room off the main administrative corridor. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing system of immaculate order that matched his mind. She sat across from him. He sat at the desk and folded his hands on it, which was what he did when he was about to say something he wished he did not have to say. "There have been some concerns raised," he said, "about your continued fitness for your role here." She looked at him. What kind of concerns? He was not a cruel man. She had always known that about him. He said it in the most dignified way he could find, which was still a direct answer, because he was also not a man who used vague language to avoid uncomfortable things. "The nature of your situation," he said, "has come to the attention of the head of staff, and above." Above. The words sat in the room between them. "Who above?" she said. Owen looked at her with the expression of a man who would rather be anywhere else. "The matter was addressed with the Alpha King's office directly," he said. "The estate has a policy regarding personal situations of this kind, when they exist in the context of certain relationships." She kept her face exactly where it was. She had built it there over 3 years and she was very, very good at keeping it. "There is no relationship," she said. "There is nothing that can be described as a relationship." "Nadia," he said quietly, "I am very sorry." The door of his office opened before he could continue. She turned. A man she had seen twice before, one of the Alpha King's senior estate managers, a man named Graham, precise and expressionless, stood in the doorway with an envelope in his hand. He set it on Owen's desk. He did not look at her. "The termination package," he said to Owen, "per the King's instructions." He left. She looked at the envelope on the desk. Owen looked at it too. He did not touch it. "You have until end of day to collect your things," he said. "The package is generous, under the circumstances. It's the right thing, at least. She said nothing. She stood up. She picked up the envelope. She walked out of his office. She went to her room. She moved with the precision of someone who is managing something very large, by applying an extremely fine motor focus to each individual action. She pulled her canvas bag from the wardrobe. It was heavier than the day she arrived, which was the measure of 3 years in this place. She folded her clothes and put them in. She gathered her books, her few personal items, the small notebook she had used for every estate meeting. She put on her coat. She stood in the middle of her room and looked at it for 30 seconds. The east corridor heated, the north forest outside the window. The room she had made into hers, piece by piece, from nothing. She picked up her bag and walked out. Lucy was in the corridor. She had been waiting. She looked at the bag. Her face was doing something complicated that she was trying very hard to control. "Lucy," Nadia said, "don't." "I'm not doing anything," Lucy said, her voice thick. "Good. I'm going to write to you every week." "I know." They stood in the corridor. Lucy grabbed her and held on for one hard moment. Nadia held back. Then she let go. She walked the east corridor, past the repaired heating, which was warm and steady, past the door she had passed every day for 3 years, past the library, which she did not look at, down the back staircase, staff staircase always, and into the boot room, and through the rear exit, and outside. It was December. It was the last week of December, past the solstice. The temperature was -9, and the sky was the flat gray of a sky that had already given everything it had, spent and solid. The estate grounds around her were white and silent. The gate at the end of the service road was still closed. She walked to it. She pressed the release on the pedestrian side and it swung open. She walked through it. It swung closed behind her. The road beyond was icy and she walked carefully, her bag over one shoulder, her breath white in the air. The nearest town was 4 miles. There were no buses this late on a December afternoon. She had $67 in her pocket and the envelope from the estate, which she had not opened. She did not look back. She was very good at not looking at things. She walked. The cold was serious and settled, and she pulled her coat tight and walked and thought about absolutely nothing, because there was a specific mercy in having nothing left to calculate. She walked 4 miles on an icy road in December with her canvas bag and her $67, and everything she had built for 3 years scattered behind her on the floor like linens. She walked, and she breathed, and she did not cry, not that afternoon, not on that road. She would cry later, somewhere else, somewhere that was hers. She had to find somewhere that was hers. The border town of Kosovo was 3 hours by bus from the Volkov estate, not a long distance, in the ordinary measurements of life. In the geography of the situation she had just left, it was another world. She arrived on a Thursday evening with her canvas bag, $44 remaining after the bus fare, and the sealed estate envelope she had still not opened. She found the town the way she found most things, by looking at it carefully and asking practical questions. She went to the town administration office before it closed, and asked about temporary housing. A woman named Carol, who had the efficient kindness of someone who had answered this question many times before, gave her a printed sheet with 3 options. The shelter on the north side of Kosovo was full. The first motel was cash only, $80 a night. The second option was a boarding house on a street called Mill Lane, run by a woman named Patricia, who took guests for $30 a week if they helped with morning cleaning. She opened the estate envelope on the bus to Mill Lane. Inside was a certified check made out to her name. It was a real number, more than she would have expected from a business that had just walked her out through a service door in December. She held it in her hands and thought about the word generous, which was the word Owen had used, and she thought about what the word meant in this context, which was, we know what we did and we are attempting to balance it with money. She folded it and put it back in the envelope. She would deposit it, not because it fixed anything, because she was a practical person, and money was a practical resource, and she needed resources. Patricia was a direct woman in her mid-60s, who had converted the top floor of her house into 3 small rooms and rented them to people who needed somewhere, without being asked too many questions about why. She showed Nadia the room, a single bed, a window that looked onto a small yard, a shared bathroom, with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone showing a tool that does a specific job. No guests after 9, Patricia said. No noise past 10. I make breakfast at 7, but I won't wait for you. If you're going to be sick in the night, go to the bathroom at the end, not the one closest to my room. Okay, Nadia said. You're going to be sick in the night, Patricia said. Not a question. Nadia looked at her. I've had girls in your situation before, Patricia said. It's fine. I'll leave crackers outside the bathroom door. She went to bed that night in a room that smelled of wood cleaner and unfamiliar fabric softener, in a building that had none of the structure she had built her daily life around, with a canvas bag on the floor and $44, and her entire situation spread out in front of her like a map with no roads. She slept deeply. She was surprised by this. She had expected to lie awake the way she had been lying awake for weeks. Instead, something in her body, having walked 4 miles in December cold and navigated the shape of an entirely new situation, simply stopped, and she fell into sleep like something released. In the morning there were crackers outside the bathroom door, as promised. She got up, she cleaned, she found work. This is the part of her story that cannot be told slowly, because she did not live it slowly. She lived it at the pace of necessity, which is always faster than you think it should be. The next months moved in the compressed way of months that require everything you have, leaving no space for the normal padding of hours that do not matter. She found a job at a diner on the main street of Kesava within a week of arriving. It was called the Morning Corner, and it was exactly what it sounded like. A narrow room with 8 tables and a counter, serving breakfast and lunch to the people who needed somewhere to sit and eat at reasonable prices. The owner, a man named Bill, was 60 years old and had run the place for 30 of those years with his wife, who had passed away 2 years ago, and whose absence was visible in every corner of the diner, in the way absences become visible when they are recent enough to still be furniture. Bill asked her 2 questions. Could she carry 3 plates, and could she arrive by 6:15? She said yes to both. He hired her on the spot. She was good at waitressing. She was good at it for the same reasons she had been good at estate work. She noticed what people needed before they said so, she moved efficiently in small spaces, and she had a quality of steadiness that customers responded to without being able to say why. She could read a table. She could manage 3 conversations at once without letting any of them feel abandoned. She remembered regulars after the second visit. Bill noticed. He didn't say much about it. He watched. She suspected this was how he said most things he meant. Patricia let her stay on past the initial week without renegotiating. They had settled into a routine without discussing it. Nadia cleaned the ground floor before breakfast. Patricia left coffee and crackers. The mornings had a shape. Patricia was not warm in the way that required commentary or return warmth. She was warm in the way that required nothing at all. She simply made space and kept it available and did not ask questions she didn't need the answers to. In February, Nadia found a midwife. Her name was Rose, and she worked out of a small practice on the edge of town, and she had the organized directness of someone who had seen everything that could happen to a person's body and had made peace with all of it. Rose asked practical questions at the first appointment. Nadia answered them. At the end of the appointment, Rose looked at her over the desk and said, "And the father? Is he involved?" "No," said Nadia. "Does he know?" Nadia looked at her. "No," she said. Rose nodded once. "Then we work with what we have," she said, and they did. The pregnancy was, by every medical measure, uncomplicated. Nadia's body, unlike her life, appeared to know exactly what it was doing. She was tired in the first trimester in the deep cellular way that no amount of sleep entirely resolved, and she carried crackers in her apron pocket and drank ginger tea with the dedication of a project and worked her full schedule at the diner, because she could not afford to do otherwise. Bill gave her a stool behind the counter to sit on between tables. He said nothing about it. He simply placed it there one morning and pretended it had always been there. She thought about the estate every day. Not about him. She had given herself strict limits on that, limits she enforced with the same disciplined practicality she applied to everything. But about the East Wing, about Lucy, about Kara and Pete and the way the estate worked, the specificity of a place she had known in such detail that she could have navigated it blindfolded. She had built 3 years of herself into that place, and the building still had all of it. Every inch of work and every learned routine and every earned understanding, and she had walked away from all of it in the time it took to pack a canvas bag. She was not angry about it, not yet. She was something closer to stunned, the way you are stunned after a fall, in the moments before the pain arrives and you understand the full dimension of what you've hit. Lucy wrote, as promised, every week, on Sunday. The letters came to the Mill Lane address in Lucy's handwriting, which was large and slightly chaotic, and they contained everything that was happening at the estate. The personnel changes, the small dramas of the staff kitchen, the slow arrival of spring on the grounds, a funny story about Pete and a delivery van that had taken a wrong turn. Lucy said nothing about him. Nadia understood. She wrote back, telling Lucy about Kosova and the Morning Corner, and the table of 4 elderly men who came every Wednesday and argued loudly about regional politics, and tipped exactly 11% regardless of the service. She said nothing about what she was carrying. Lucy knew. She did not push. In March, the anger arrived. She had been waiting for it. In the careful way she waited for things she knew were coming. She knew she would be angry eventually. It was not a question of if, but of when. The body's shock finally resolved into something more specific. But she had not predicted the form of it. She was wiping down a table at the morning corner on a Thursday morning, mid-March, 4 months in, when a woman at the counter said, to no one in particular, "Did you hear about the Volkov king? The council is pushing hard. They want him formal by summer." Her companion made a sound of interest. The first woman said, "Helena Sloane, probably. Everyone's expected it." Nadia wiped the table. She wiped it with complete evenness. She carried the cloth to the back room and stood over the sink for 2 minutes looking at the wall, and the anger came then. Not like a storm, but like something solid and structural, arriving and settling into place. She was not angry at him for not wanting her. She had understood that from the beginning, understood it even while it was happening, even while she was being foolish about it, even on the December night in the library when she had let herself stay and drink tea and be listened to as though she mattered in the way that entitled people to care. She had understood his position, and her own, and the simple, unbridgeable distance between them. She was angry that he had let her feel, even for one night, like the distance was smaller than it was. She was angry that the method of her removal had been a sealed envelope, delivered by a man who did not look at her. She was angry that not one person in that building had called her a person when the decision was made. She went back to work. She poured coffee. She was excellent at her job. The anger was useful, she found. It had a structure and a direction. It was not comfortable, but it was clarifying, like a cold window on a morning when you need to see clearly. She had been carrying something soft and unresolved for months, the stunned non-feeling of the immediate aftermath, and the anger replaced it with something she could use. Something that kept her back straight and her voice steady and her feet moving through the long shifts at the diner with a certainty she had not felt since December. She was not a victim. She had never been a victim, and she was not starting now. She had made decisions. She owned that. She had let herself feel things she should have managed more carefully. She owned that too. And she had been walked out of a building by a man with an envelope in his hand, and she owned the rage of that, and she carried it like a compass. She would build again. She was very good at building. April came. Rose confirmed what Nadia already knew about the shape of the timeline. She expanded her savings carefully. She took extra shifts on the weekends when Bill would allow it. She talked to Patricia about staying on through the summer, and Patricia said yes without making a production of it. May. The town of Kesova in May was a different animal than the town in winter. Wider somehow, as though the cold had been compressing it, and it expanded when the warmth came back. There were people on the streets in the evening. The diner stayed busy later. She walked home from her shift in the long light and felt the May air on her face and thought, "I am building something." She wrote to her Aunt Donna in Greywater. A careful letter. Not everything, but enough. Donna called the same day she received it, on the diner's backroom phone during Nadia's break, and said, in the voice of a woman who had raised a child who did not need to be told what to do, "You're doing it right. You call me if you need anything." She did not ask about the father. She did not say "I told you so," because she had never had a chance to tell her anything. Nadia had never told her enough for that. She simply said, "You're doing it right." Nadia held that like something important. Summer arrived. Hot and bright over Kesova, the high country sun hitting the main street at an angle that made everything look clean and slightly unreal. She was large now in a way that had stopped feeling strange and started feeling like information her body was providing about the work ahead. She was tired in ways she managed. She was also, very quietly and without announcement, okay. Not happy, not settled, not fixed, but okay. In the particular way of someone who has been stripped of most things and found that what remained was sufficient. She had her job and her room and Patricia's crackers and Rose's appointments and Lucy's Sunday letters and her Aunt Donna's voice on the phone. She had 68 tables at the morning corner, and Bill's silent stool behind the counter, and the Wednesday old men who tipped 11%. She had the long Kesova evenings and her window onto the small yard, and the particular sky of this part of the territory, which was wide and clear and did not belong to anyone. The estate was still there, 3 hours north. She knew that. She did not let herself think about it the way you do not let yourself look at a scar too closely in the early months, not because looking would hurt, but because looking changes the thing you're looking at. She was building. She did not know, in the long summer evenings of Kesova, that 3 hours north in the great gray estate, the Alpha King was beginning to feel the shape of a particular absence. She did not know that the estate had started doing the specific thing that large silent houses do, when the weight of a consequence has not been fully understood yet. She did not know what she had left behind there, or what had begun, in her absence, to change. She was making coffee and carrying plates and saving money and growing a person, and it was August when she went to the hospital at 2 in the morning with Patricia driving and Rose already there, and it was 4 in the morning when it was over and the nurse placed him in her arms, small and red-faced and absolutely furious about the world he had just been delivered into. She looked at him. He was the most real thing she had ever seen. He was small enough that her arms held all of him without difficulty, and he was looking at her with the unfocused but entirely present expression of someone who was encountering everything for the first time and found the encounter significant. She thought, "You are mine." She named him after nobody. She named him Callum, which was a name she had liked since she was a child without knowing why. One of those words that had always sounded right to her, like a word in a language you do not speak but recognize. Callum James Bloom, his own name, with hers at the end. Patricia drove them home from the hospital. She had put fresh sheets on Nadia's bed and bought a small second-hand crib, which sat in the corner of the room in the practical manner of a thing installed by a person who believes in being ready. Nadia lay in the bed with Callum in the crook of her arm and looked at the ceiling and thought about everything she had thought about getting here and felt the distance between the thinking and this, the actual, physical, irreducible reality of the small person currently making a sound like the world owed him an explanation. She laughed, quietly, so as not to startle him. She laughed until her eyes were wet, and then she wiped her face on the sheet, and she looked at him again. "Okay," she said to him. "Here's what we're going to do. 3 years." Nadia measured them not in months or seasons but in Callum's benchmarks, the first time he held his own head up, the first time he laughed, the first tooth, the first word, which was not mama but Bill, delivered clearly and with complete confidence on a Tuesday morning at the morning corner, when he was 11 months old, and Bill had brought a slice of apple from the kitchen. Bill's face in that moment was the most visibly moved she had ever seen it, which, given that Bill registered everything through a minimal shift of expression, was still not very much, but she knew. She had built 3 years, again, from the ground up. This time the ground was different, rougher, less protected, but more fundamentally hers. Nobody employed her in this life. Nobody gave her a room in exchange for her discretion and her reliable arrival at 6 in the morning. This was different from the estate in the way that a house you built yourself is different from one you were let into. Her savings had grown. The estate check, she had deposited it the second week in Kosovo, practical person that she was, had been the foundation of something she tended carefully. She sent Callum to a childminder named Edith 3 mornings a week while she worked the breakfast shift. Edith was 60 years old and had raised 5 children, and treated Callum with the benign authority of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by babies, but retained a genuine interest in specific ones. Callum, who had inherited from somewhere, she did not think too carefully about where, a quality of still, focused attention that made adults feel seen, had become a specific one to Edith within a fortnight. She had been promoted, in the informal way promotions happen at small diners. Bill had stopped working mornings himself, and she had effectively begun running the opening shift. Not a title, not formally, but a set of keys, and the responsibility for float management, and the Wednesday roster, and the understanding between them that she was the person who knew how the morning corner worked when Bill was not in it. Bill paid her more, again, not formally. He simply increased the number and adjusted the weekly envelope that he gave her on Friday afternoons, and they both pretended this was not a promotion because neither of them were people who made ceremony of things. She had Callum, and she had work, and she had the small life of Kosovo, which she had grown to understand with the detail she gave to everything she stayed in long enough. The rhythms of the town, the people, the way the main street changed character at different hours, the faces she knew now by their coffee orders and their children's names. She had Lucy's Sunday letters, which had never stopped. She had Rose, who had transitioned from midwife to something closer to the category of person you call when things are hard, which she only ever called twice, and both times Rose had been brief and direct and entirely useful. She had her Aunt Donna, who had driven the 6 hours from Greywater when Callum was 2 months old, and stayed for a week and held him, and cooked food, and fixed the sticking drawer in Nadia's bedroom without being asked, and then driven home without making the visit mean anything other than exactly what it was. She had herself. This was the thing she had not expected to find so clearly. In the estate, she had been building herself around the structure someone else provided. The schedule, the role, the approval of Owen Marsh, and the invisible standard of the Alpha King's household. The building was real, but the scaffolding was borrowed. In Kosovo, she had built without scaffolding. What stood was entirely hers. She knew she was not the person she had been at 22 with a canvas bag and a bus ticket. She was not sure she could have said precisely what had changed. It was not dramatic, no specific moment of transformation. It was the accumulation of 3 years of carrying what she was carrying without putting it down, of making decisions in the middle of the night when there was nobody to consult, of finding the answers inside herself, because they were not available anywhere else. She was harder in some places, she knew that, less open to certain things. There were nights when Callum was asleep and the apartment was quiet. She had moved out of Patricia's boarding house and into a small 2-room apartment above a fabric shop when Callum was 8 months old, paying her own rent, her own utilities, the modest independence of it something she held carefully, and she sat in the quiet, and the hardness sat with her. She was fair about it. She did not think that what had happened to her was small. What had happened to her was this. She had cared about someone who had not thought carefully about what caring about people cost them. He had not been cruel with intention. She had turned this over enough times to be clear about it. He was not a man who made decisions from cruelty. He was a man who made decisions from position, from the priorities and pressures of a life that had never required him to consider certain categories of consequence. She had been one of those consequences. She had been managed. The management had been done efficiently and at a distance, because efficient and distant was how things got done in his world, and she had been a thing that needed managing, and the matter had been resolved. She knew all of this. She had known it before the service door, in some form. The knowing had not protected her from the door. In the spring of the 3rd year, the territory news began mentioning the Volkov Council with increasing frequency. She read the territory newspaper. She had started reading it when Callum was 1, because she wanted to know the shape of the world he was going to grow up in, and because avoiding information had never been a strategy she believed in. She read it in the mornings before her shift, at the small table in her apartment with her tea, Callum still asleep. The Territory Council, she read, had issued a formal timeline. The Alpha King had until the end of the year to present a formal succession plan. The territory required stability, and stability in this context was defined in particular ways. A formal mate, a recognized heir, continuity of the bloodline. These were old requirements, older than the current structures, but they had weight, and they were being applied. She read that Helena Sloane had removed herself from consideration. The phrasing was formal, but the suggestion underneath it was of a decision made mutually and without drama, which was, she thought, probably accurate. Helena Sloane had the look, even from one distant observation in a red dress, of a woman who understood strategic timing. She read about the council's pressure. She put the newspaper down. She drank her tea. She did not allow herself to think about the implications of the territory requiring an heir, because thinking about the implications of the territory requiring an heir would lead to thoughts about Callum's existence and Callum's inheritance, and what the word heir meant in the specific context of a child whose father did not know he was a father, and that path led to a door she was not ready to open. She told herself she was not ready. She was honest enough to know that not ready and unwilling were sometimes the same thing in disguise, but she held the distinction anyway. The summer that Callum turned 2 was the summer the territory politics moved faster than the newspaper could keep up with. She knew this because Bill had a radio behind the counter that stayed tuned to the territory news service, and the news service was talking about the Volkov situation with increasing urgency. 2 senior council members had made public statements. There was a formal review process mentioned. The phrase used was crisis of succession, which was the kind of phrase that, once said publicly, changed the temperature of a situation. She carried plates and poured coffee and listened. She thought about Callum. She had never once thought of him as a solution to anyone's problem. He was a person. A small, opinionated, bafflingly cheerful person who had recently become deeply interested in drainage systems and asked questions about where water went, with a focus that suggested he intended to understand this completely or die trying. He ate toast with the dedication of someone for whom toast was a calling. He was afraid of the large dog that lived 3 houses down, and managed this fear with great dignity by simply ignoring the dog's existence when they passed. He called Bill Bill, and Rose the lady, and Patricia that lady, and Edith, Edith, with the direct specificity of a person who had decided which people mattered, and had assigned them their correct designations. He was hers. He was completely hers. And he had, from the biological fact of his existence, a father who had signed an envelope and had him walk to the service exit. She sat with this in the quiet August evenings, while Callum slept, and the territory news moved, and the council pressed, and she turned it over and looked at it. Not yet, she told herself. Not until I decide, not until I'm ready, not until it's on my terms. She was a practical person. She liked terms. In September, 4 months after the council issued its formal timeline, Something happened that changed the tempo. She heard about it from Lucy, whose Sunday letter that week was longer than usual and written in a more compressed hand, the way Lucy's letters went when she had a lot to say and was being careful about how much of it she said. What Lucy wrote was this: there had been an inquiry, not public, internal, to the estate and the council. The matter under inquiry was whether the Alpha King had produced any biological offspring in the previous several years. The purpose of the inquiry was to determine whether a succession existed outside of a formal mating arrangement. Lucy did not say how the inquiry had been initiated. She did not say what information had been produced. She said only, "Nadia, I think you should be careful." And then she said, "I'm sorry I didn't know sooner." Nadia read the letter twice. She folded it. She sat at her small table in her apartment with Callum playing on the floor with his drainage system catalog, which was actually a home improvement magazine but served his purposes, and she looked at the window. People knew, or someone had begun the process of knowing. She thought, how long do I have before this stops being a thing I control? She thought, I need to decide now, before it gets decided for me. She looked at Callum on the floor, deeply absorbed in a photograph of pipe fittings. "Cal," she said. He looked up. "We might be going somewhere new soon," she said. He looked at her with his father's precise attention, the thing she had spent 3 years trying not to see and seeing every day. "Okay," he said. "Is there water there?" She looked at him. Something moved in her chest that she could not name, and she made a decision in the same moment it moved. Not because she had resolved everything, not because she had answers to the questions she had been carrying for 3 years, not because she was ready, because the alternative was having the decision made for her in a room she was not in, and that was not acceptable to her. "Yes," she said. "There's water there." "Good," said Callum, and went back to his magazine. She was going to need terms. She was going to need very clear terms, written down and signed and witnessed and not negotiable. And she was going to need the specific version of herself that had walked 4 miles on an iced road in December and not looked back. She had that version of herself. She had built her here, piece by piece, in the 3 years since. She called her Aunt Donna that evening after Callum was asleep. She talked for 40 minutes. Donna listened and said very little, and said what she said precisely. "You know what you're worth," Donna said at the end. "Go make sure he knows too." She sat in the quiet for a long time after she hung up. Then she began making a list. She was wiping down the counter on a Thursday morning when the cars arrived. Not cars, 2 cars. Dark, both the same color, both with the quiet engine note of something expensive pretending not to be. They pulled up on the street outside the morning corner, in the kind of organized way that suggested the people inside them had decided exactly where to stop before they arrived. She had been told, by no one, that this was happening today. She had her back to the window. She turned when she heard the slow crunch of tires on the frost-edged street, and she saw the cars and she did not move for 3 seconds, the cloth still in her hand. Then she turned back to the counter and kept wiping. The door opened. She heard it. The particular shape of the diner changed, the way a room changes when someone enters it who carries a lot of air. And Bill, at the far end of the counter restacking cups, went very still in the specific way Bill went still when something was happening that he had not encountered before. She did not look up. She heard footsteps, one set, unhurried, coming directly to the counter. Not the random drift of someone finding a seat. Direct. She had been working in this diner for 3 years and she knew exactly how much space existed between the door and the counter stool, and she counted the steps before they stopped. He sat down. She could feel the presence of him at the counter without looking, the way you feel weather before you turn to face it. She kept wiping the counter. She wiped it away from him, toward the far end, covering the full length, and then she picked up the empty coffee cup that had been sitting there since the last customer left, and carried it to the machine, and she set it in the rack, and she poured a fresh cup, and then she turned around. He looked different, or she was different, and the difference was landing on him. He was wearing what she privately classified as non-estate clothes, a dark pullover, civilian trousers, a coat that was not the kind worn to impress. He had not brought anyone to the counter with him. He was just sitting, both hands on the edge of the counter, looking at her with the stillness she remembered and had spent 3 years learning to think about less. He looked tired, not the performed tiredness of important men who mention their workload. Genuinely tired, in the face, in the eyes, in the set of his shoulders, like he had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and was not sure whether to put it down yet. She set the coffee cup in front of him. "Coffee?" she said. She watched something move through his expression, a small adjustment, involuntary. the response of someone who had prepared for multiple versions of this moment, and had not prepared for this one. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." She poured it. She put the pot back on the burner. She looked at him. "Nadia," he said, her name in his voice, the same quality it had always had, like the word cost something to carry. She had not been prepared for that either, despite herself. "Do you want the breakfast menu?" she said. A pause. He looked at the counter. He looked up. "No," he said. "I came to. We have eggs 3 ways and toast from 6 to 11, she said. "Lunch starts at 11:30. If you want something else, you'll need to ask Bill." Bill, at the far end of the counter, made no movement whatsoever. He was extraordinarily still for a man who was technically rearranging cups. Damon looked at her. He did not look away. "You're not going to make this easy," he said. "No," she said. "That's fair," he said. She had not expected that either. She had prepared for several versions, the authoritative one, the conciliatory one, the political one wrapped in enough formal language to cushion whatever it needed to cushion. She had not fully prepared for plain. She picked up a cloth and moved to the next section of counter. He turned on his stool to face her. "I need to talk to you," he said. "You are talking to me," she said. "Properly," he said. "Away from." He looked around the diner. There were 3 other customers, the Wednesday old men, who were in their usual position and were watching this scene with the focused interest of people who found their own arguments much less interesting suddenly, and a young woman by the window who was making a thorough job of not looking. "I'm working," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll wait." She looked at him. "I have 3 more hours." "I'll wait," he said again. She walked away. She took the Wednesday men's orders and refilled their water, and collected 2 plates from the pass. She carried those plates. She cleared a table. She made change for the young woman by the window, who tipped generously and left, and she suspected this was partly motivated by wanting to be somewhere else when whatever this was escalated. She worked her 3 hours. He stayed. He ordered the toast from the breakfast menu at 9:30, which she acknowledged without commentary, and brought out with butter and the small jar of marmalade that she kept on the counter for Bill, who was the only person who used it. She set the marmalade down next to his plate without saying anything. She turned away. She heard him pick it up. At 10:45 she untied her apron and folded it and put it under the counter. Bill took her section without being asked. She came around the end of the counter and she looked at Damon, who had been sitting on that stool for 3 hours, and had drunk 2 coffees and eaten his toast, and remained, the whole time, very still. "Walk," she said. Outside was cold, November, the first real cold of the season, the kind that had a quality of intention to it. They walked away from the morning corner toward the end of the main street, where a small park existed that the town had installed 20 years ago and occasionally maintained. She walked with her coat buttoned and her hands in her pockets, and she did not look at him. He let the silence exist for the length of a street. Then he said, "I know why I'm here." "I assumed," she said. "It's not only that," he said. "I want you to understand that." "What is it then?" she said. A pause. They had reached the park. She stopped at a bench, the metal kind, cold through a coat, and did not sit, just stood facing the small park with its bare trees and its gravel path and its frost-gray grass. "I don't know what I thought," he said. "That is the honest answer. When it happened, when the decision was made, I don't know what I was thinking. I'd like to tell you I had reasons. I don't think I had reasons. I think I had reflexes, and I followed them, and they were wrong." She looked at the bare trees. "That's the first time you've said anything about it directly," she said. "I know. 3 years, she said. I waited for a phone call, a letter, anything." She heard him breathe. "I know," he said. "Not from you," she said. "I knew better than to wait from you. But someone, anyone in that building, 31 staff." She paused. "I got one, Lucy, every Sunday for 3 years, and she did it on her own." He was quiet. "I walked 4 miles in December," she said. In -9. 4 miles. To the bus stop. I didn't have enough for a taxi. She said it matter-of-factly, because it was a fact. "I don't tell you that so you feel bad. I tell you because you should know the shape of the thing." "I know," he said. "You don't," she said, turning to face him. "You can't, but you can try to understand it. That's the most I'm expecting." He looked at her. He was the same as she remembered, and also different, in the specific way that 3 years different lands on a face. Not aged, not worse, just altered by the accumulation of time under pressure. He looked at her with the entire focused quality she had spent years trying to forget and could not. "Where is he?" he said. She had known this was coming. She had been waiting for it the way you wait for a wave you can see from a distance. Not afraid, just ready. With a friend, she said. I'd like to. I know what you'd like, she said. I'm not there yet. We're talking first. You and I are going to talk until I'm satisfied, and then I'm going to decide what happens next. Not you. Not the council. Not whoever sent you the report that told you about Callum. Me. He was very still. You named him Callum, he said. I did, she said. It's a good name, he said. She turned back to the bare trees. The cold had a quality of precision today, each degree of it measurable. Tell me what you want, she said. The real version, not the political version. A long silence, long enough that she turned slightly to make sure he was still there. He was looking at the ground. When he looked up, his face had something on it she had not seen in the version she had memorized, the particular expression of a person who has stopped managing. I want to see him, he said. That's what I want. Not the succession, not the council's approval. I want to know who he is. He stopped. He started again. I've been sitting with the idea of him for 3 weeks and I can't. He stopped again. She watched him have difficulty with language. She had never seen that before. I know what I did, he said finally. I'm not here pretending it was less than it was. I walked away from something I should have stayed for. I understand if that is not fixable. She looked at him for a long moment. He met it. We're going to talk more, she said. And then I'm going to think. And then I'll tell you what is possible. He nodded. And there will be terms, she said. Written, legal, witnessed. Yes, he said immediately. She had expected negotiation. The immediacy surprised her. She kept her face where it was. Callum's last name is Bloom, she said. That is not changing. Okay, he said. I'm not coming back to the estate, not like before. I understand. And what I want, she said, matters. Not as a courtesy, as a condition. He was looking at her with the full quality she remembered, the quality that made rooms feel different in size. Yes, he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she put her hands back in her pockets. Come back tomorrow, she said. We'll talk more. She turned and walked back toward the morning corner without waiting to see his face. She felt him behind her, not following, just standing in the park in the November cold. She walked, and her stride was even, and her face was steady, and her heart was doing the loud, inconvenient thing it had always done in his presence, which she acknowledged and managed and filed. She pushed open the diner door. Bill looked at her from behind the counter. He come for the boy? Bill said. She looked at him. And other things, she said. Bill nodded. He handed her a coffee without her asking. She took it. She sat on her stool behind the counter and she drank it, and she thought about terms. He came back the next morning. She had expected this. She had also, lying in bed at 2 a.m. with Callum asleep in the next room, and every possible version of the next days running through her head, expected to feel more uncertain about it. Instead, she felt something she recognized from the Kesava winter 3 years ago, from the morning after walking out of the estate, the quality of stillness that came when the shock had fully passed, and what remained was the actual situation, clean-edged, workable. She was up at 5:30. She made Callum's breakfast and her own. She dropped him at Edith's with the routine ease of a system that had operated for 2.5 years, and she went to the morning corner and opened up and ran the first hour of breakfast service as she always did. And then at 8:30 she took off her apron and came around the counter and sat across from him in the booth she had reserved by the simple method of not clearing the previous customer's coffee cup, which was the morning corner's informal indication of occupation. He had a notebook. She had not expected that. She sat down. He set the notebook open on the table. I've been thinking about what you said, he said, about terms. Good, she said. I want to do this properly, he said. Not. He stopped. Not the way I did things before. I want it to mean something on paper. She looked at the notebook. It had, she could see, headings and notes. Not in the rough way of someone thinking quickly, but in the considered way of someone who had worked through something in the night. What have you got? She said. He turned the notebook so she could read it. She read. He had thought about custody first, which was where she had expected the fight to be. What was written was not a fight. What was written was a proposal, generous in the detail, specific in the limits, structured around Callum's daily life in a way that acknowledged the life she had built for him without requiring it to dissolve into something else. Callum's residence stayed where it was. Visits to the estate would be at her discretion and Callum's, not scheduled as obligations. Education decisions were jointly made, but her position was described as primary. Financial support was enumerated with the specificity of someone who had thought hard about numbers. She read it twice. She looked up. "This isn't what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" he said. She considered this honestly. "A negotiation that started from a different position," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I've had 3 weeks to think," he said. "And 3 years I didn't spend thinking, which I've also had to account for." He looked at the table, then up. "I know what you gave up. I know what I cost you. I'm not here to pay for it with a number or a legal structure. But I'm also not going to start this, whatever this is, by asking you to give up more." She held that. She was fair about it. She looked for the angle in it, the political calculation, the position it served, and she found some. There was always some. He was not a man who had reached his position without understanding the intersection of genuine intention and strategic outcome. This position was also good politics, and she was clear-eyed enough to know that. It was also, possibly, genuinely meant. Both things could be true. She had always been good at holding two things. "There's something not on this list," she said. He waited. "Me," she said. "My position, my life, my name, none of that is on this list." He looked at her steadily. "That's because I didn't want to assume," he said. "That part is yours to write, if you want to write it." She looked at him. "I'm not here to offer you a title," he said. "I'm not here to. I'm aware of what I am. I'm aware that I am the person who made you walk 4 miles in December, and that I cannot change that, and that the reasonable response to me sitting across from you is significant distrust." He paused. "I am also here because I have thought about almost nothing else for 3 weeks except what I want, which is, I want to be in the same room as that, as you, as—" He stopped. He started again. "I'm not good at this." "No," she said. "I'm aware of that. You're doing better than I expected," she said. It cost her something to say it, but honesty was the reflex she had never trained out of herself. He looked at her. Something shifted in his face. Not the slight private smile she remembered, but something heavier and more grateful. She picked up the notebook. She picked up the pen that was inside it. She drew a line and wrote below it. What she wrote was not romantic and not generous and not forgiving. It was precise. It was, "My professional standing is to be formally acknowledged in any public documents related to this arrangement, meaning that I am listed as Callum's mother, not as a former employee." It was, "I will not be accommodated in a staff wing." It was, "Any decision that affects my daily life requires my agreement, not my notification." It was, "I work, I keep my work. It is not contingent on what this becomes or does not become." She pushed the notebook back to him. He read it. He did not negotiate a single line. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "That easily?" "These aren't difficult requests," he said. "They would have been 3 years ago," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not 3 years ago." She sat with that. She picked up her coffee cup. She set it down. "He's going to meet you," she said, "at his own pace. You don't push. You don't overwhelm. You sit at Edith's kitchen table and let him decide whether he's interested in you. And if he wants to show you his pipe-fitting magazine, you look at it like it's the most interesting thing you have ever read. Because to him it is." He was watching her face. "Pipe-fitting," he said. "Drainage systems, broadly," she said. "He wants to understand where water goes. Don't ask me why. It's become a comprehensive study." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "He's 3. He's a very focused 3, she said. "You'll understand when you meet him." He looked at the table. She watched something happen in his face that she chose not to examine too closely. The specific expression of a person coming up against a reality they have been abstractly aware of but have not yet been permitted to feel. "Okay," he said, at his pace. "One more thing," she said. He looked up. "If you disappear again," she said, "if you get what you came for, and this becomes convenient to step back from, if any version of that happens, I will not give you a second chance to find your way back. I want you to understand that before we proceed." She said it without heat. It was a plain statement of the actual condition, not a threat. He looked at her for a long moment. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" she said. "Yes," he said. Simply, no elaboration. She believed it. She was not naive about why she believed it. She was not certain she was right to believe it. She was not ruling out that she was being affected by her own history with this man in ways that distorted her judgment. But she had built a very fine instrument for reading situations over 3 years, and the instrument said, "This time he means what he is saying." The instrument could be wrong. She accepted that. She was proceeding anyway. "Saturday," she said. "Edith's house, 10 in the morning. I'll text you the address." She had his number. Lucy had given it to her 2 years ago and she had put it in her phone without saying anything about it, which was exactly the kind of thing she did and never admitted. He registered something when she said she'd text the address. He did not say, "How did you have my number?" He simply said, "Saturday at 10. She stood. She picked up her apron. She went back around the counter. He sat in the booth for another 20 minutes. She refilled his coffee once. He left at 9:45, walking back out to the dark car, and she watched him through the window from the far side of the counter without pretending she wasn't. "You okay?" said Bill, from the kitchen pass. "I'm in process," she said. "Right," said Bill. He passed her a plate to run. She ran the plate. She worked the rest of her shift. She thought about Saturday. Saturday arrived the way significant things arrived, at its normal pace, neither faster nor slower than any other morning, stubbornly ordinary in the way that days which are going to matter always seem to be. She picked Callum up from Edith's that morning. She had arranged with Edith to use Edith's kitchen for the meeting, partly because Edith's kitchen was familiar and safe to Callum, and partly because Edith herself was the human equivalent of a stable structure, and her presence in the background was a resource. Edith had been told, briefly and without extensive elaboration, what was happening. "The father," Edith had said. "Yes," Nadia had said. "Long time coming," Edith had said, in the tone of someone who had always suspected a version of this would arrive, and had simply been waiting for it with the patient efficiency of someone who prepared for most things. Callum was in Edith's kitchen when they arrived, sitting at the table with his pipe-fitting magazine open on the catalog spread he had been studying for 2 weeks. A full-page layout of copper joint fittings that he referred to as the Copper family, each one named by him on a system she had stopped trying to understand. Damon arrived at 10 exactly. She heard the car, heard the door, heard the knock. She answered it herself. He was holding nothing. He had come with nothing. No gift. No formal quality. Just himself in the same civilian clothes as before. He looked at her. She held the door open. He came in. Edith was at the counter with her back to them, making something that produced a good smell and required concentrated effort. She did not turn around. This was also a resource. Callum looked up from the magazine. He examined Damon with the focused, unhurried attention he gave to things he was trying to understand. Not shy. Callum was not a shy child, just thorough. He took a full 5 seconds, then he said, "You're tall." Damon looked at him. Something in his face did something she had not seen before, a kind of arrival, a coming forward of himself that had nothing managed about it. "Yes," he said. "I'm going to be tall," Callum said. "Edith says so." "She's probably right," Damon said. Callum considered this for a moment. Then he held out his magazine, open to the Copper family page. "Do you know what these are?" Damon came to the table. He pulled out the chair across from Callum and sat in it. He did not hover, did not crouch, did not perform the adult approximation of being at a child's level. He just sat, and was at the table. He looked at the magazine. He looked at it with actual attention. "Copper fittings," he said. Callum's eyes widened slightly. "Do you know which ones?" "The large ones on the left look like they handle water direction," Damon said. "The smaller ones could be connectors." Callum looked at him with the intensity of a person whose expert knowledge has just been partially matched. "That's the corner family," Callum said. "And those are the joiners. The joiners are important because they make the water go where you want it." "That makes sense," Damon said. "Water has to go somewhere," Callum said, with the philosophical weight of someone who has considered this deeply. "It does," Damon said. She stood by the counter and she watched her son and his father sit together at Edith's kitchen table and discuss water direction, and she held the moment in her hands and looked at it carefully, from all angles, and she did not let herself decide what it meant yet. She was a practical person, and she proceeded carefully with things that mattered. But the moment had its own weight and she felt it. Edith quietly put a cup of tea on the counter beside her without a word. She picked it up, she stood, she watched. He came back the following Saturday. She had not told him to. She had not said, "Come back next week." She had said Saturday at 10, and he had come. And the meeting had ended 2 hours later, when Callum fell asleep on the couch with his magazine on his face, and she had carried him home. And she had sent a text that said, "Sutherland fine." He had replied, "Yes." That had been that, she thought. She had thought it would be once a fortnight. She had thought she would need to manage the pacing of this, because men in his position were busy in ways that created natural spacing, and she had prepared herself to be the one who held the timeline steady. The following Saturday he arrived at 10 again. She heard the car from her apartment above the fabric shop. She looked out the window and saw the same dark car on the street, and she went downstairs and knocked on Edith's door. "He's here," Edith said, before she'd finished knocking. I can see the car from my window. The boy is already asking what time. Callum was standing in Edith's hallway in his boots, both coat buttons done up incorrectly in the haste of a child who had dressed himself without assistance and was not stopping to check. Your buttons, Nadia said. I know, he said, in the tone of someone who has assessed this information and made a quality decision. He went to the door. Damon was at the end of Edith's front path. Callum pushed open the door and walked down the path with the contained urgency of a person who has somewhere important to be, and he looked up at Damon and said, I have the next magazine. It has boiler systems. Show me, Damon said. She watched this from the doorway. Edith was beside her. He comes every week and that's just how it is now, Edith said. Apparently, Nadia said. And how is it for you? Edith said. Nadia watched Callum take Damon's hand, not because Damon offered it, but because Callum decided he was going in the direction of the gate and there was a useful hand available, and lead him back inside with the confidence of a child who had decided where the important things were, and who would follow. I'm figuring it out, she said. Fair enough, Edith said. She went back inside. Nadia followed. The second Saturday had a different quality than the first. The first had been careful, measured steps, each party making assessments. The second was less careful in the specific way. Things get less careful when they're becoming familiar. Callum had decided Damon was a person of value, which in Callum's accounting meant a person worth instructing. He walked him through the Boiler System magazine with the focused efficiency of a teacher who knows his material and expects attentiveness from his students. Damon was attentive. She watched him read the pages Callum directed him to, ask the questions Callum wanted asked, receive the explanations with the focused listening quality she remembered and had spent 3 years not remembering. He was not performing interest. She knew the difference between performed interest and real interest. She had worked in a large house for 3 years where both were in constant supply, and she had learned to tell them apart. He was genuinely interested. In the magazines because Callum was. And Callum was interesting. She observed this, filed it, and said nothing. He began asking her questions on the third Saturday. Not about Callum. He had questions about Callum, she knew. But he was careful about those. Careful about the rhythm of what he asked and when. And she appreciated that without saying so. He asked about the morning corner. About Bill. About Kosova. He asked these things in the same manner he had asked about her life in Greywater 3 years ago in the library, as someone genuinely curious about the answers rather than someone gathering useful information. She answered, carefully, with more brevity than she would have used with someone she was less complicated about. On the fourth Saturday, he arrived at 10 and did not leave until 3. This was not a decision anyone made. It was simply that the morning moved into lunch, and Edith made sandwiches with the practicality of someone who had anticipated this, and Callum ate 3/4 of one sandwich and then got down from the table and brought the boiler magazine back with some urgency, because they had not finished the section on thermostatic valves. She and Damon ate at the table, and she was aware that this was the most time she had spent in a room with him since December 3 years ago, and that the 3 years had done something to the geometry of the room. The dangerous electricity that she had spent the first 6 months of her working at the estate trying not to acknowledge was still there. She was honest about that. She had always been honest with herself even when it was inconvenient, but it sat differently now. She sat differently. She was not a woman anymore who watched herself carefully for signs of foolishness. She was a woman who had walked 4 miles on ice and built an entire life with her hands, and she sat across from him with that behind her, and it changed the room. He looked at her sometimes when Callum was busy elsewhere, and she met those looks with the same directness she gave everything now, and whatever he read in them made him careful in a way that she found, unexpectedly, she respected. On the 5th Saturday, Callum made a decision. He had been watching, over the previous weeks, with the comprehensive assessment of a 3-year-old who is trying to categorize something new. She could see this in him, the tilted looks, the questions that seemed unrelated to their surface content, the way he occasionally tested Damon in small ways that were transparent to her but genuine on his part. The 5th Saturday, Callum climbed into Damon's lap. Not ceremoniously. Not as a big moment. He had finished with the magazine and he wanted to look out the window, and Damon was by the window and the lap was available. He climbed up and leaned against Damon's chest and looked out the window at the November street with the complete absence of self-consciousness that 3-year-olds operated under. Damon went very still. She watched his arms go carefully around Callum's small body, not gripping, just present, and she watched his face with the attention she usually gave to things she was going to have to make decisions about later. His face did the thing she had seen once before, at Edith's table on the first Saturday. The arrival without management, the coming forward of himself that was not produced but simply happened. He looked out the window above Callum's head at the November street, and she watched his expression be the kind of thing that was not meant to be watched. She looked away. She did not say anything about it, neither did he. Callum slid off after a while and went back to his magazine with a report about a drain cover he had seen on the street. She thought about it for a long time that night. She thought about it for several nights. She had a discipline for this kind of thinking. She gave it space. She let it develop. She did not foreclose it, and she did not rush it. She had learned this skill in Kosovo, in the long, quiet evenings of building, and it was one of the things she valued most about who she had become here. The terms were already on paper. That was the practical foundation. Everything outside the terms was a different matter. Slower, less structured, less certain. She had never been someone who made emotional decisions quickly, and she was not starting now. But she was starting to hold the possibility of something. That was new. On the 6th Saturday, she stayed in the room the whole time instead of going to the kitchen for parts of it. On the 7th Saturday, she sat next to him on the couch while Callum delivered his most comprehensive lecture yet on the municipal water system, which he had been working on since a library picture book had opened up the conceptual scope of the subject. She sat next to him, and she felt the warmth of him beside her, and she thought, I am aware of this. I am choosing to be aware of it. Both of those things are decisions. After Callum was in bed, she had begun staying at Edith's through the afternoon, because Edith's house had become the structure for Saturdays, not in a formal way but in the way of things that have repeated enough times to have settled. She and Damon sat at Edith's kitchen table with the leftover tea from lunch. He said, I think about December. She looked at her cup. I'm not saying it to. He stopped. I'm saying it because I think you should know that I've thought about it, that it wasn't nothing to me. Even then. You had a remarkable way of showing it, she said. Her voice was even. I know, he said. You let a man deliver an envelope, she said. You didn't even come to the door. I know, he said. She looked at him. Why? He was quiet for a moment. The real kind of quiet, not the managed kind. Because I was afraid, he said, of what I would do if I came to the door, which was not a good reason, and I understood that even then, and I did it anyway. She looked at him. What would you have done? She said. He met her eyes. I don't know, he said. That was the problem. I didn't know, and I had spent my entire life in a position where not knowing was not something I could show. She turned her cup in her hands. She thought about that. She thought about a man who ran a territory from the age of 26, who had been given a position before he was ready for it, who had spent 7 years making every decision from inside a structure that rewarded certainty and punished doubt. She thought about what it would do to a person, over years, to become the kind of person that structure needed. She also thought about the service exit, and the envelope, and the -9 morning. Both things. She could hold both things. I'm not forgiving you for it, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not there. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. I'm not here for that. What are you here for? She said. He looked at her steadily. Whatever you'll give, he said. At whatever pace. On your terms. She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that the light in Edith's kitchen shifted slightly as a cloud moved outside. Don't make me regret this, she said. I won't, he said. She was not naive enough to think a promise was the same as a guarantee. She was also clear-eyed enough to know that sometimes a promise, made by the right person in the right moment, was the beginning of something that became real through the making of it. She would not let herself be foolish again. She would not let herself walk into this with her eyes anything but fully open. She had built herself into someone who could hold her own ground in any room, and she was going to hold it here too. But she was also not going to let what had happened to her become the thing that defined what was possible. She had survived it. She had built from it. She was not going to let the worst of it be the ceiling. She was going to proceed carefully, on her own terms, with very clear eyes. She was already going to proceed. That decision had been made somewhere in the 7th Saturday, and she was honest enough with herself to know it. She refilled their tea. They stayed at the table for another hour, and they talked, and the conversation was easier than she had expected, and harder than she was prepared for, which was, she thought, the accurate shape of something worth having. She walked home at 9 that evening with Callum asleep on her shoulder, his weight warm and solid, his breath even. She walked through the Kosovo night with her son and her open eyes and her very clear terms, and she thought about what she was building now and what it might become. She was not certain. Certainty was for smaller things. For this she had intention, and care, and the specific kind of courage that comes not from being unafraid but from having already survived the thing you feared. She had that. The document arrived on a Tuesday morning in a plain envelope delivered to the Morning Corner, addressed to her in handwriting she recognized as belonging to an estate official rather than to him. She opened it at the counter between the breakfast rush and the 11 o'clock lull, standing with her coffee cup, reading through 12 pages of legal language. She read it twice. She set it down. She called the number at the bottom, a lawyer, not the estate's internal solicitor but an independent firm in the territory capital, which was a detail she noticed and filed, and spent 45 minutes on the phone asking very specific questions. The lawyer, a woman named Caroline, answered each one directly. The document was, in Caroline's words, unusual. It was unusual because it had been drawn up to give Nadia more than was legally required. It was unusual because the financial provisions could not be reduced or altered without Nadia's written consent. It was unusual because the clause about Callum's residence specified not just that he would remain with Nadia, but that any future changes to that arrangement required Callum's own expressed agreement once he was old enough to give it, which put Callum in a position of authority over his own life that most documents of this type did not include. She asked Caroline, "Is there anything in here that could be used against me later?" Caroline was quiet for a moment. "I've read a great many documents of this kind," she said. "This is the one I would have written for your side." She put the phone down. She looked out the diner window at the November street. She had not expected that. She had expected a document that was fair by the standards of fairness in these situations, which was fairish, which was weighted toward the party with the better legal team. She had prepared herself to negotiate significant sections of it. She needed to think about this. She signed it the following week, not immediately. She gave it 8 days, sent her own queries through her own solicitor, a quiet man in Kosovo named Gerald who had handled small estate matters for clients, and who looked at the document with the expression of someone who keeps finding the same note in different keys. "This is very good," Gerald said. "I know," she said. "You've either got very good leverage," he said, "or very good guilt on the other side." "Both," she said. She signed it on a Thursday morning in Gerald's office and took her copy home and put it in the folder she kept at the back of her wardrobe with her important documents. Then she called him. He answered on the second ring. "I signed it," she said. A brief silence. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "This is a legal agreement, not a gift." "I know," he said. "I know the difference." She believed he did. That was one of the things she had been recalibrating over the 8 Saturdays and the evenings at Edith's table, and the long quiet nights when she lay in the dark and thought carefully about who he actually was, versus who she had believed him to be, versus who the worst of what had happened had required her to cast him as. He was none of those things entirely. He was a person, complicated, capable of failure, capable of something better than failure, currently in the process of trying to be the second thing and not making a production of the effort. She was watching this without softening her view of it. She was watching it precisely. The Saturday after she signed, something different happened. Callum met him at the door, not just stood in the hallway but actually opened it himself, with the solemn importance of a person performing a duty, and said, "You're here." "Yes," Damon said. "I have a project," Callum said, and turned and walked inside with the expectation that this information was sufficient invitation. The project was a drawing of the Kosovo water system as Callum understood it, executed in red and blue crayon on 4 sheets of paper taped together. He had been working on it for 2 weeks. It was remarkably detailed for 3 years old and a box of crayons, and he had opinions about which sections were accurate and which still needed work. She watched Damon sit on the floor, not at the table, on the floor, and study the 4-sheet drawing with real attention. She watched him ask which building the red pipe went to and receive a precise answer. She watched Callum add a line with his crayon and explain why, and she watched Damon's face as he followed the explanation. She took her coffee to the window and turned away. Edith appeared beside her. "Stop watching and pretending you're not watching," Edith said. "I'm looking at the street," Nadia said. "You are not looking at the street," Edith said. Nadia looked at the street properly. November had moved into its deeper register, the light flatter, the cold more settled, the town wrapped in the particular quiet of winter arriving and meaning it. "He comes every week," she said. "He does," said Edith. "He's been coming every week for 2 months." "Yes. He rearranged something last week to make it," Nadia said. "He mentioned it. Something about a council meeting moved to allow the Saturday." Edith looked at her. "He rearranged a council meeting," Nadia said. "So I heard," said Edith. Nadia looked at the street. "I don't want to make a mistake," she said. "What kind of mistake are you worried about?" Edith said. "The same one," she said. The one where I build something on a foundation that isn't solid, and then I find out it's not solid after I've built enough to hurt when it falls. Edith was quiet for a moment. You built everything you have here on your own, she said. You know what solid foundation looks like because you laid it yourself. You know the difference. Nadia said nothing. What does it feel like? Edith said. Nadia turned. In Edith's sitting room, on the floor, her son was explaining a complex theory about municipal pipe diameter to the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, who was lying on his stomach on Edith's rug, chin in his hands, listening as though this were the most important information he had encountered in years. It feels like something I'm going to need more time with, she said. Okay, said Edith. But, she said, and then she stopped, because the but was large, and she was not ready to finish the sentence. Edith did not push. That was one of Edith's considerable qualities. She took more time, 2 more Saturdays. She let things move at the pace they had been moving, which was slower than she suspected he would have preferred, and faster than she had expected to be comfortable with. On the 10th Saturday, Callum fell asleep on the couch in the early afternoon, a short sleep, the kind that happened when he had been very intellectually active in the morning, and she and Damon were left sitting at Edith's table with the quiet house around them. I want to ask you something, he said. She looked at him. Not a big thing, he said, or, it's not nothing, but I'm not asking for more than what I'm asking. Ask, she said. Is there a version, he said, slowly, where I take you to dinner? She held that for a moment. One dinner, he said, not a commitment, I'm not asking you to decide anything. I'm asking if I can take you to dinner. She looked at the window. Outside, Kesova, in the late November light, pale and real. She thought about the library in December, 3 years ago. She thought about the November morning walking 4 miles on ice. She thought about the 8 weeks of Saturdays, and the document in her wardrobe, and Callum on his father's lap looking at the street, and Edith's tea, and the way he had sat on the floor of this room for the drainage system drawing. She thought about herself, sitting in this chair, what she had built into this person, in 3 years, that allowed her to sit here in this way. One dinner, she said. He looked at her. And it's in Kesova, she said, not the estate, not somewhere that requires anything of me. Somewhere I choose. Wherever you want, he said. And we pay separately, she said. Something moved through his expression that was approximately the slight private smile, more muted than she remembered it, carrying something she didn't quite have a name for. Nadia, he said. What? Okay, he said. Yes, all of that. She nodded. She stood up. She went to check on Callum, who was still asleep with one arm over his eyes in the manner of a small person who found the light an unreasonable imposition even in sleep. She stood looking at him for a long moment. He was so entirely himself, so completely the person she had made, so exactly the point of everything she had done for 3 years. She thought, whatever happens from here, this is already more than enough. This is already something no one can take from me. She went back to the kitchen. She poured 2 more cups of tea. She set one in front of him and kept one for herself and sat down. They talked for another hour. The conversation moved in the ways she was learning these conversations moved between them. Practical first, then something more, then back to practical, then something more again, the tide of it. She had stopped fighting the tide. She had started watching it instead. He left at 4. She walked him to the door, Edith's front door, the path, the gate. He stood at the gate with his hand on it. Thank you, he said. Don't say thank you, she said. I told you. I know, he said. I'm going to keep saying it anyway. She looked at him for a moment. Next Saturday, she said. He looked at her. We're back here next Saturday, she said. Same as usual. The dinner is after, when I decide. Yes, he said. She went back inside. She stood in Edith's hallway and she breathed. She went to wake Callum. He surfaced slowly, the way he always did, with a great deal of gravity, as though coming back from sleep was a serious undertaking that deserved respect. Was he here when I was asleep? Callum asked. Yes, she said. Did he wait? She paused. Yes, she said. He waited. Callum considered this with the evaluative depth he gave to everything that mattered. Then he nodded. Once, with the decisive quality of a conclusion reached after thorough consideration. Good, he said. She held her son's hand as they walked home through the November street, past the morning corner, past the fabric shop below her apartment, into the building and up the stairs. She unlocked the door and they went in, and the apartment was warm because she had left the heat on, and Callum's drainage drawings were on the kitchen table from yesterday, and the folder was in the wardrobe and the terms were in the folder. She made dinner. Callum sat at the table and told her a theory about where rain went after it hit the ground, which was a theory she found compelling and told him so, and he received this seriously and asked her follow-up questions. She thought about dinner. Not where, not when, not the logistics of it, just the fact of it, the fact that she was going to go to dinner, that she had said yes, that she had said it clearly, on her own terms, with her own voice, in a chair she sat in by her own choice. She was not the woman who had carried a tray to a firelit library and sat down because a man said she should stay. She was not the woman who had walked down an icy road with an envelope she hadn't opened. She was not the woman who had lain awake in a boarding house room trying to find enough ground to stand on. She was 3 years past those women, and she had built every inch of the ground she was standing on, and she knew its quality. And she was going to stand on it with her eyes open and her terms written down and her son's drainage system on the kitchen table. She set 2 plates. She called Callum to eat. She sat at the table with him while the November dark came down over Keseva, and she thought about what she was building now, and she thought it might be the thing that lasted. She was not certain. She had stopped requiring certainty from things worth doing. She poured his water. He told her more about rain. The night settled around their small, warm apartment with the steady particularity of a thing that was simply itself, and she sat in the middle of it and was ready.